mainly been to do with colours, fonts, margin and borders and that kind of thing. Now there's also a few properties we can use to control the layout and position of elements on the web page, and one of those properties is called the position property. Now it can have one of 5 values: static, fixed, relative, absolute and sticky, and we use these to position elements differently on a page. So first of all, static. Now HTML elements have this default value of static to begin with. There's no special positioning qualities given to this value, but it does keep the element in normal document flow of the page. Now if we set an element's position to be relative, then we can shift the element around the page relative to its original position in the page. So for example, I could say of a certain element position relative, then left 20 pixels, which means move it away from the left by 20 pixels of its original position, and then bottom 20 pixels, so move it from the bottom of its original position by 20 pixels as well. So that's how we can shift things around a little bit using position relative. Now position fixed, that positions a certain element relative to the viewport. Now the viewport is just a part of a browser that we see the web page on. So for example, we could have a navbar element and we could give it a position fixed, and we could say left 0, top 0, and that positions this navbar relative to the viewport 0 pixels from the top and 0 pixels from the left. So it's going to stay there even when we scroll down the page like this. It will always be fixed at the top of the viewport. Now the absolute position allows us to position things absolutely relative to its closest parent, which has also been given a position property that is not static. So I could have one section here, the parent, which has a position of relative, for example. Then I could position a child element inside that which has a position of absolute. Left 20, so 20 pixels from the left of the parent, and bottom 20, so 20 pixels from the bottom of the parent. So when we use position absolute, it's positioned absolutely relative to a parent which has a position property applied to it as well. Okay, now don't worry if you don't really understand that just yet. We're going to have practice of this in a minute. And same goes for sticky. We'll practice this in a minute rather than me show you a diagram of this, because it's a little bit too complicated to go over in a slide. But essentially it's a mixture of static and fixed. It's static to begin with, then it becomes fixed when your scroll position on a page reaches a certain point. So again, we'll look at this in detail shortly. So now we have a brief overview of these different types of position. Let's go ahead and try using some of them in our project. Okay then, so I'm back over here in the project, and in styles.css we don't have anything yet. Now what I'd like to do is show you static position first of all. Now remember, I said that static position was like the default position that all elements have originally, and it doesn't really actually do anything. But let me just demo this regardless. I'm going to grab the header, so I'll say header, and that's my selector. Then inside I'll say position is static. Save that and preview in a browser, and notice this header over here, this thing, doesn't actually change. We can see the position is static, but if we uncheck that so that it's no longer static, then it's not done anything on the page. All this does is put it into normal document flow. And by normal document flow, I just mean that's how elements are normally displayed in a browser from top to bottom without any kind of extra positioning. So I suppose this position property of static is good if we want to reset something that's previously been positioned absolute or relative, and we want to put it back into normal document flow. Otherwise, it's basically just the default value. So the next property value I'd like to look at is the relative position value. And remember, I said that if we position something relatively, it means we can move it relative to its original position. So we could shift it to the left, shift it up, down, etc. So let me first of all position the header again relatively and just nudge it around a bit to show you how this works. So I'm going to change this now to relative, and then if I save it, you're going to notice first of all it doesn't actually do anything. But if I then apply a left property and say 100 pixels, that means it's going to shift the header from the left edge to the right by 100 pixels. And that's going to be relative to its original position. So if I save this now, you're going to notice it's moved over here to the right away from the left position. Now that's a little confusing when you first start using this, because if you're thinking, well, this is called left, surely it should go left by 100 pixels, but that's not the way these positioning things work. When we use left and provide a value, it means we want to shift away from the left by this value. Likewise, if I did top, it means I want to shift away from the top by 100 pixels in this case. So if I save it and preview over here, now we can see that it's down here and it's actually gone over this image right here. So the image hasn't moved down in itself, this has just been moved over it. Now this original position over here, this still has a space, this header, for where it originally was. But we've taken what was in that space and just basically moved it relative to this original position. That's all this does. Now a lot of the time when we position something relatively, we don't necessarily move it around like this. We position something relatively so that we can position something else inside the element, a child element, absolutely relative to the parent, and we're going to see that in a second. For now, what I'd like to do is just take this off because we don't want to position this relatively anymore. Instead, what I'm going to do is position the banner over here relatively instead, because this thing here, the welcome message, which is currently down here, we are going to position that absolutely inside this banner later on. So for us to position this absolutely, we need this parent to have a position property as well. So we'll set that to relative to begin with. So let me come down here and say banner, and we'll say position relative. Now I'm not going to shift this around at all. Like I said, the only reason I'm doing this is so we can position something absolutely inside it later. But if I wanted to, I could do that. I could say top, 200 pixels, and that's going to move it down by 200 pixels. So let's just leave it like that for now. Okay then, so the next position value I'd like to talk about is the absolute position value. But before we do that, I just want to tidy up a couple of styles right here, because at the minute this image is a little too wide. At most it should be 100% width of the browser. So what I'm going to do is first of all target the image. I'm going to say banner, then get the image tag inside it, because that's where the image is, right here inside the banner. And then, if we say max hyphen width, we've not seen this property before, and set it to 100%, then the max width it's going to go now is 100% of its parent, or if that's not been set a width, then 100% width of the viewport. So now it's fully contained inside the viewport. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is position this welcome message right here, and let me just zoom into the browser a little bit so we can see this. Position this relatively, or rather absolutely relative to this banner right here, so it's going to sit on top of the image. So remember, to do that, I first of all have to make sure that the parent has a position property that is not static, and we do. We gave it a position of relative. The banner is the parent of the welcome section, so now we just need to position this welcome section absolutely relative to that banner. So let me come over here and grab the banner welcome like so, and then inside I'm going to say position is absolute. So if I save this and come to the browser, notice what happens here. We still see this welcome message down here, but now the rest of the content is moved up behind that welcome message, and that happens because we've positioned this absolutely. And when we position something absolutely, we take it out of normal document flow and we lose that space that it was originally in. Now remember, when we positioned this relatively and we moved it around, the space that it was originally in was retained. We kept it there. It was just a gap at the top. But now when we position something absolutely, we do not retain that space. This comes out of normal document flow, and that space is then eaten up by the rest of the content underneath it. So that's something to be aware of. What we need to do now is position this so it goes over the banner, and we need to position it from the left of the banner and the top of the banner. Now if we inspect this and hover over banner, we can see the dimensions of the banner over there on the page. We can see the little blue box that goes over it. So that's what we're positioning this welcome message relative to. So if I now say, okay, well, from the left of that banner I want it to be 0 pixels, then it's going to position it from the left by 0. If I then say from the top by, I don't know, 200 pixels, then it's going to position it from the top by 200. So if I save this and come over here, now we can see it's right here. So that's 0 from the left edge, 200 pixels from the top. Now we could use a pixel value like this, but notice that as the banner gets smaller and larger, then the position of this welcome message doesn't actually change because we're using an absolute value. It's always the same height from the top, even when the banner gets smaller. Now that's not really going to work. So what I'd like to do instead is use a percentage value right here instead. I'll say 30%, and that will work a bit better. So now it's 30% from the top, but as the banner itself gets smaller and larger, it kind of recalculates itself so that it still fits in the banner. That's using percentages, okay? Okay then, so I'd like to apply some extra styles to this to make it look a bit better. So let's go over here and first of all give this a background, and this is going to be a background color of FEB614. I've already found that color, I've not just made it up off the top of my head. It's an orange color, so let's preview this, and it looks something like that. Okay, now I'd like to make this text white, so we'll say color is going to be white. Save that. Oops, don't do it in capitals. Color is white. Save and preview. Okay, looking good. And then finally, just a bit of padding to space this out inside. So we'll say padding is going to be about 30 pixels all the way around. So save that and preview. Okay, that's looking good. Now I'd like to make the font size a bit bigger. So if we open this up, we can see that inside we have an H2. So what I'm going to do is set the font size of the H2 itself. And I'm going to set that to be about 75 or 74 pixels. So I'm going to say banner and then H2. We don't have to say .welcome then H2 because we don't have to make it that specific. We're not trying to override another style. So in here we'll say font-size, and that will be around about 74 pixels. If I save this and preview, then we can see it looks like this. Now that looks very big at the minute, and that's because I'm zoomed into the browser over here at 150%. If I reset this back to 100, that looks a bit better now. Now, I'd also like to make this word a little bit bigger than these words. Now, if we look inside the index over here, and we scroll to where we have this welcome message, this word, Mario Club, that I want to make bigger is inside a span tag. So we could use that in our selector to target this single word. So let me do that. I'm going to say banner H2 span, and then there I could say font size, and if I wanted to, I could set this to be something like 90 pixels, and you know, that would work fine. It would make it a bit bigger. But instead, I'm going to show you a different unit of measurement that we can use, and that is going to be ems. So I could say something like this, 1.2 or 1.3 ems. And what that does is take the value that it currently is, that it inherits from the parent, which is this, 74 pixels, and it times that by 1.3. So I can't work out what 74 times 1.3 is, but it might work out about, I don't know, 100 or something like that, maybe a bit more. So if I save this now and preview, we can see this now is much bigger. Now if I inspect this and come over here, we can see that the font size right here is 1.3 ems. So 1.3 times whatever this is, which is 74 pixels now, because that's what we provided to it. Okay then my friends, so that is absolute position. Remember, the important parts are that first of all, the parent element has to have a position property that is not static. In our case, it's relative. Secondly, we use position absolute on the element that we want to position inside that parent. Then we can use a combination of left, top, or even right and bottom instead to position this element inside that parent element. So the next position value we're going to look at is the fixed position value. Now, something with a fixed position is position relative to the viewport itself. Now the viewport is just this section of the browser that we actually see the website in. So over here, now this would be the viewport right here. On a mobile device, the viewport is going to be something like that. Okay, so what I'd like to do is position the header at the top, this thing up here, fixed to the viewport, so it's always at the top, because right now, if we scroll down, we lose that header. I'd like it to stay at the top all the time. So to do this, we're going to position this header as fixed. So over in the code, we already have a selector for the header. Now we just need to, first of all, give it a background color. and this is going to be like a ready color. I've already found the hex code for that. And then also I'm going to give this some padding. We're going to do all the other styles first of all, then look at the fixed position. So that's 20 pixels all the way around. Then I'm going to say text align and set this to center, so the text is in the center. Then I'm going to look at the position. So let me save this first of all. This is what it looks like so far. Now I'd like to position this now so it's fixed to the top of the viewport. So to do that, I'm going to say position is fixed, and then the width of this thing is going to be 100%. Now in fact, before I do this, let me just cut that. I'm going to save it, and notice the width has completely gone. If I inspect the element and then go to the header, you can see it's that little square in the corner, right? And it's behind the banner as well. Now first of all, let me sort out the width. I'm just going to say the width is 100%, so then it goes to 100% of the viewport width. So now if we hover over this, we can see that box is now 100% width, but it's still behind the banner. We can see it poking out over there. Now that's no good. We want it in front of the banner. Now to do that, we're going to have to use a property called Z-index or Z-index. And what that property does is bring things forward or push them back on the page. So we want to bring this thing forward right here. Now initially, before we start using Z-index at all on the page, everything has a Z-index of 0 by default. Now if we give something a Z-index of more than that, then it brings it forward. And if we give something a Z-index of less than that, it pushes it backwards. So since everything has 0 to begin with, if I give this a positive value like 1 or 2, then it's going to bring it forward, okay? So let me try that. I'm going to now say over here, Z-index, and give this a value of 1. Save it, and now we can see it's brought forward on the page, so we can see it. Okay, so now this has a position of fixed. So if we start to scroll down, you can see it's still fixed at the top, but we still have a little bit of space around the left and right, so I need to give this a top and left property. So top 0, so it's 0 from the top of the page, and left 0, so it's 0 from the left of the page. Save that, and we get rid of those little spaces. So that looks good. Finally, I just want to style this H2 or H1, I think it is, a little bit so it looks a bit better. So let me have a look inside index.html, and we can see at the top that this is an H1 inside the header. So I'll say header H1 to grab that, and then first of all we're going to color this white. Then I'm going to give this a border, and that's going to be 8 pixels in width. It's going to be solid, and it's going to be white. I'm also going to say padding is 6 pixels to the top and bottom, and 12 pixels left and right. Now when I do 2 values for padding like this, the first value is for the top and bottom, the second value is for the left and right. So let me save that and see what it looks like so far. Okay, not great. This is because it's a block level element, so by default it takes up the full width of the page. We've seen that in the past. We don't want to do that. We want it to only take up the width of this thing right here. Now we can't set it to inline because then we can't use margin and padding properly on inline elements, but we can set it to inline block, which we've seen before as well. So we can say display is inline block, and then we get the best of both worlds. So it doesn't take up the full width, but we can still use margin and padding on it properly. So now it looks something like this. Now there's one more property I'd like to show you, and that is something called border radius. And border radius helps us to give a curved corner on the element. So I could say something like this, border hyphen radius, and set it to 10 pixels, and then that's going to make the corners curved a little bit. So if we see this, we can see those now, they're quite soft, the corners. What I want to do is make this more like a capsule. So I need to increase the border radius by quite a lot. I'm going to set this to be instead 36 pixels, save it, and now it looks something like this, which I think is a bit better. So there we go, my friend, that is fixed position, and we've used it for this heading at the top of the page. Awesome. Okay then, my friends, so the last position value I'd like to talk about is the sticky value. And that's kind of like a combination of a fixed position value and also a static position value. So say for example, we give this navigation right here a position value of sticky, then what it's going to do is initially behave as if it was given a position of static. It's just going to sit there and do nothing. But then as we scroll down, what we can do is say, okay, at a certain point like here, now become fixed and stay in this spot. So if we scroll any further, then it's not going to go up behind this header, it's going to stay fixed just below the header. Okay, so that's what sticky does, and then when we come back down it goes to its original position. So let's give this a whirl. First of all, I want to give this navigation some styles. So if we look inside the index file, we can see this nav right here. We'll just use that as a selector because that's the only nav element inside this HTML. So we can say nav, and then I'm going to say the background color is equal to F4, that's a grey color, and I'm also going to give this a padding of 20 pixels all the way around. So now if I save this and preview, we can see this is what it looks like. Okay, I'm going to make these things look a bit better as well. So first of all, let me say nav li, and inside here I'm going to say the width is going to be roughly about 25%, because if you think about it, these things right here, there's 4 of them, we want each one to take about 25% of the width, so they spread across. So the width of those is going to be 25%, and they're going to display as inline hyphen blocks, so they sit next to each other. Okay, the font size of those is going to be about 24 pixels. Now if we save this, then it looks kind of okay, but the last one goes to the next row. So this is just a quirk of using inline block and 25%. They should all add up to 100%, but it does go to the next line. Now we can combat this by going to the parent, which is the UL. So I can say nav UL, and then I can say white space and set that to no wrap, like so. And that basically means it's not going to wrap onto the next line, and we should see them all in one single line, which we do now. Awesome. So that looks a bit better. Now what I also want to do is come to the nav UL and say the max width of this is going to be 1200 pixels, and then I'm going to give this a margin of 0 top and bottom, then auto left and right. And what that does is say, okay, on the left and right, if there's any space left over, I'm going to automatically apply it to both sides. So essentially it centralizes it in the middle. We have a central column of 1200 pixels, and if the viewport was say 2000 pixels wide, we'd have an extra 400 on the left and 400 on the right of margin because of this auto keyword. It works itself out. So that's a nice way to centralize things. We give something a max width and then a margin of auto left and right. So if I save this now and come over here, we can now see that these sit in the middle. That's nice. Now, okay, I want to now style the anchor tags a little bit. So I'm going to say nav lia, and I'm going to say the text decoration is going to be none, like so. And then we're also going to color these differently, and we'll say the color is going to be 4B, 4B, 4B. That's like a grey color. So save it, and now it looks like this. Awesome. Now the first one right here, that has a class of join. So I'm going to style that a little bit differently and color it red. So if I now say nav lia.join, that's the class, and then give this a different color, and that color is going to be the same as this heading color wherever it is at the very top. That, so let me copy that dude, and oops, I've done this all wrong. So nav lia.join, and the color is going to be this thing right here. So let me save that, and that is looking better. Okay, so that's the nav styled a little bit. Now what I'd like to do is apply this sticky position so it stops about there and becomes fixed. So let me now come to the nav itself and give this a position of sticky. Now if I save it at the minute and preview this, then it's not actually going to do anything. But if I now say the top value should be about 100 pixels, then it means when it gets to 100 pixels from the top, it's going to stick there. So now if I do this, when it gets to 100 pixels, it stops, and we can just about see the grey there. Okay, so we need to increase that top value by a little bit, but I can do that easily. I'll just change this to about 120 pixels, and this is just going to take a little bit of playing around. So okay, not quite. Let's change this to 140 and see that. Almost there. We'll say 150, and I think that should be good. Yeah, okay, I'm going to go to 148, and that looks perfect. Okay, so now what happens is it stays below the banner, but as soon as it gets 148 pixels, I think, yep, from the top, it becomes sticky. And now as we scroll down, we can still see that navigation at the top. So that's quite nice. That is position sticky. So then for the rest of this video, what I'd like to do is apply some more styles to different elements on this page to get it looking more presentable, to make the layout, and to get it looking good on desktop devices. So I'm actually going to start by selecting the body and a few other different elements and resetting some of their values, because remember, I said that a browser provides certain properties by default. If we have a look at, for example, a link over here, I know we've overridden most of the styles, but if we look down here, we can see user agent style sheet. And if we look at the LI, then we're going to have user agent style sheet, the UL, user agent style sheet, and there's things like margin and padding that's applied to things. I want to strip all of those back, all of those default browser styles, by resetting some of the properties. Now, you quite frequently hear this being called a CSS reset, and you can get varying different degrees of these things. I'm going to do a simple one which targets just a few elements like the UL, LI, body, H1, H2. I don't think we use an H3, so we'll stop there, and anchor tags. And what I'm going to do is set the margin of each one to be 0, so strip out any margin that the browser applies to it by default. Also the padding, 0, and then I'm going to give each one of these elements a font family of Arial. Now it's enough to give just the body a font family of Arial, and then it will cascade into the rest of the rules through inheritance. But I'm going to be explicit, so font family Arial, and this is a web safe font. So if I save now, then it's already starting to look a bit better, like this. And if we scroll down here, okay, we need to adjust this now because obviously the font was a different size. Therefore, we need to bring this up now. So let me go to the nav down here, and I'm going to change this to about 108 this time. I can see already it's not quite there. I'm going to do 106 instead, and I think that would be absolutely fine. 106. Okay, looking good. So already this is looking a bit better. Now I want to move on to the rest of the content down here. So if we have a look inside the HTML, below the banner we have this main tag right here. So let me target that first of all. I'm going to say main, and inside there I'm going to say the max width of this is going to be 100%. So it's not going to go off the page. Then I'm going to give this a width property of 1200 pixels. So this looks a bit contradictory, but what I'm saying is, say for example we have a web page or a browser that's 2000 pixels wide, then the width is going to be 1200 pixels. But say we have something where the browser or the viewport is 800 pixels wide, then the max width is going to be 100%. So the maximum it can get to on that particular device is going to be 800 pixels. It's not going to reach this. Okay, so they kind of work in tandem. So after we've done that, I'm going to say then margin is going to be 80 pixels in the top and bottom, and then auto left and right. That was the trick I showed you earlier. So if we have a 2000 pixel wide viewport, then we're going to have a central column of 1200 pixels, and the margin is going to be equally distributed on the left and right because of this auto keyword. Okay, so let me just add a couple more things. I'm now going to say the padding is going to be 0 top and bottom, 40 pixels left and right. And then I'm going to use a property called box sizing. In fact, let me preview this first. Down here we can see this, right? And it's a central column now on the page, and we have the margin auto worked out on the left and on the right. Now if we inspect this, if I go a bit smaller, we can see it goes off the page. Now I said the maximum width was 100%, so why does it go off the page? Well, that's because we have a width of 100%, but we also have padding as well. So we have a total width of the 100% width plus the padding. And we can see that right here. You can see the green on the left, and also if we move over here, we can see the green on the right. So it's the padding that's actually pushing it off the page. Now what we can do to combat this is use a property called box sizing. So I'm going to say box sizing, and I'm going to set it to border box. And what that does is say, okay, I want you to incorporate this padding right here into the total width. So the max width can be 100% inclusive of the padding. Don't add the padding on top. That's what this does. So if I save this and preview, now we can see it no longer scoots off the page on smaller screens. Okay, sweet. Alright then, so after the main we have the article. Let's have a look at that. We have an H2 and a paragraph tag. So I'm going to target both of those two things separately. So let me say article H2, and then inside that I'm going to colorize this. It's going to be F63232. So if I save this, it's kind of like a ready color. We can see now it's this color. Okay, so I'm also going to set a font size, and that is going to be 48 pixels to make it a bit bigger. So this looks something like this now, starting to look a bit better. Now we need to target the paragraph tag inside the article. So I'll say article P, and then the line height is going to be 2ms. So I think we've seen line height in a previous tutorial. It basically determines the space between lines on a paragraph or some text. So this line and this line and this line, the vertical space between them, that is the line height. Now what I've said here is 2ms. So what that does is it takes the font size of the paragraph tag, which by default I think is 16 pixels in a browser, and it times that by 2. So now we have maybe 32 pixels. So if I save it and preview, now we can see we have this larger line height. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do is apply a color to this. So color, and that's going to be 4B, 4B, 4B. Okay, save that, and should be a lighter grey. Okay, looking better. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do is style these images down here. Now that is a UL tag with a class, I think, of images. Yep. So let's grab that class and use that as our selector, images, and then I'm going to say text align to the center. I want to centrally align everything inside this. I'm also going to say margin is going to be 80 pixels, top and bottom, 0 left and right. And then we're going to, make sure this is on a separate line. Then I'm going to target the li tags inside the images. So images li, and they are going to be display inline block. And that's so they sit next to each other, but we can also use margin and padding on them correctly. So let me save this and preview so far. Okay, so we can see at the minute they're still on top of each other, but what I'm going to do is say, okay, well the width of these should be 40%, like so, and then we also need to set the max width of the actual image tags inside of these, because by default they take on the full size of the image, but we want the maximum width of each image to be the size of the li tag, 40% in width. So we can say images, li, and then image, and the max width is going to be 100%, which is 100% of its parent container, so 40%. So let me save this and preview, and now we can see they sit next to each other. That looks a bit better. I want to apply a bit of margin between these two li tags, so I'm going to set the margin to be 20 pixels top and bottom, and also 5% left and right. So if you think about it, we have 40% width for each li, 5 to the left of each one and 5 to the right, so that's 50 in total for each li. We have 2 of them, so that should take up the whole 100%. Now you might think these are going to sit next to each other, but they don't. They go on top of each other, and we solved this problem before when we displayed these as inline block and the contact went to the next line. That's just the way inline block works. What we need to do is go to the parent, and we need to say white hyphen space no wrap, and that solves the problem. These are just the little quirks you come across in CSS as you go along, and you'll pick most of them up as you start to develop. But anyway, now that's looking a bit better there. The next thing I'm going to do is go on to this bit at the bottom. So if we go back to the HTML, we can see this section has a class of join. So let me style that. I'm going to say dot join, and then first of all, this is going to have a background. That background is going to be F4, F4, F4. Don't forget your hash sign at the start. Okay, so that's like a light grey background. Then we're going to say text hyphen align, and that is going to be in the center. We want to centrally align any text. The padding is going to be 60 pixels at the top and bottom and 20 pixels to the left and right. And then the color of the text itself is going to be a dark gray, which is 4B, 4B, 4B. Okay, so let me save that and take a look. All right, starting to look pretty good. We still need to style this bit right here, this H2, and probably also this input a little bit as well. So let me now say join H2 to style this. All I want to do, oops, not in capitals. So join H2. And all I want to do is set the font size of this to about 36 pixels, like so. And that looks a bit better. Okay, now I want to style this input field, which has a type of text. So all I'll do is say I want the form, because we have a form over here, remember, a form tag. And then I want the input field, oh, it's type email rather, not text, inside that form. So form input, there's only one, and that's all it's going to style. So I want to give this a margin, 20 pixels, top and bottom, 0 left and right. Then the padding is going to be 10 pixels, top and bottom, 20 pixels left and right. The font size is going to be 24 pixels to make that a bit bigger. The border radius, which remember gives it a softer corner, that is going to be 28 pixels, makes it more rounded and capsule-like. And then finally, we'll say border itself is going to be 4 pixels, solid and white. Okay, so let me save this and preview, and it looks something like this. Now, the reason I gave it a border of 4 pixels and solid and white is because later on, when we learn about pseudo elements and hover effects and select effects, then we're going to change the color of this border. Without changing the height or anything, we're just going to change the color. So it's there to begin with, but it's kind of invisible. And later when we select it, we'll change the color of that so that a user knows it's in focus. Okay, so that's pretty much this section done. The last thing we need to do is the footer down here. So I'm going to come down here and say footer. And then this is going to have a background of F63, and it's actually there, this red color. And then after that, I want to say the color of the text in here will be white. The padding is going to be 10 pixels all the way around, and we're going to align the text to the center. So text align is center. Save that and preview, and there we go. So, phew, that was quite a lot of work, but this is all CSS you've kind of seen in the past. We do have a little problem here, which I'm going to take a look at in the middle, because I'm not sure that should be like this. So we'll address that in a second, but basically, apart from that, this is looking pretty good. So, like I said, it's all stuff we've seen so far. If you find yourself struggling with it, do go back and check the earlier sections, because 95% we've already covered in previous videos. But the more practice you get, the easier this kind of thing is going to become, and the quicker you're going to be able to style websites using CSS. So let me just address this issue right here, because that doesn't look great. And I think what's happened is we have this anchor tag right here with a class of join, and we also have this section with a class of join. And when we style this join class down here, we're actually giving it a background color and some padding. Now, instead of just styling join, let's do section.join. So then we're just styling any section with a class of join, not the anchor tag itself. So if I save this, we should see that go back to normal, which we do. Okay, so there we go, my friends. We've now styled this website and it looks good for desktop. There's a few more things I'd like to do, but to do those, we're going to have to understand pseudo elements and pseudo classes. And these things allow us to do things like hover effects or select effects when we select a